All right, hey everybody. We're about to start right now. Thank you so much for being patient. We have experienced some technical difficulties. I have a guy on the line though, actually right next to me here that he's good at this kind of stuff.
Ooh, there's another guest?
Oh wait, sorry, Bob. I have another person pulling on. My mistake. We actually are going to have Tom, our channel chief advisor here at Ninja RMM, joining us too. Everybody, I'm Jonathan Crow. I'm our director of content. Not our director of IT, obviously. And with us, very, very, very happy to have Bob Coppedge on. And Bob, you've been all over the place lately. I'm just psyched that we got to get in your schedule here. I see you all over.
Yeah, especially if you watch Cops. I'm on that a lot.
Well, you know, we're all just doing the best we can in these times, you know. You got to do what you got to do. But I've seen you do all these sorts of presentations. In fact, we were promoting this event, and I had Alex from Lifecycle Insights say, I think that the image we were using of you looks slightly different. He says, "Oh, that's Bob pre-COVID hair."
Yeah, it is one of those where, you know, got the ponytail, and my wife is a nurse, and both she and I, we take this very seriously. We practice social distancing. We don't go to restaurants that are indoors or anything along those lines. And it's like, are we going to go to a concert? No. Are we going to go to a eat place? No. Are we going to go to a crowded bar or parties? No. Then she looks at me. Barbershops are open.
Yeah. Hey, priorities again. The risk assessment, and apparently the risk of you not doing that.
The risk of me not getting a haircut is a marital risk. Well, that she does not care for the hair. She really does not.
Well, hey, let me welcome everybody here. Thank you again for bearing with us. We had some technical difficulties with the Crowdcast. As you noticed, we did a weird thing where we pulled you into a new session. Still waiting. We're going to have some other guys that we're bringing on, including Tom, including our buddy Ray, who's already active here in the chat from OIT VoIP. And so thank you, Ray, for coming in. And thanks, everybody, for bringing back. Oh, Tom, I see you're here, so I'm going to bring you on, too. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to share my screen and do the usual thing. For those of you, this is your first session with us, please forgive the I promise this isn't the usual start. It's much more smooth. And what we typically do is we share an agenda doc. And that's what I'm going to put right into the chat right now. And this doc, it by no means dictates the conversation, especially having someone like Bob here. This conversation is going to go in all sorts of interesting directions. And we encourage that, right? This is supposed to be interactive. So please use the chat. There's also the ask a question function down here at the panel on the bottom of your screen. Use that. Ask Bob all the questions you have. We're going to be peppering him with stuff, but please use this as your time to take advantage. You're in front of Bob here. He's written 2 books on this subject that we're going to be talking about, which is co-managed IT. And Bob, actually, while I'm setting some of this stuff up, you and I talked last week about what are the big kind of opportunities right now. And I mentioned to you, this is one that I hear from a lot of people. Co-managed IT, it's a big one. Everybody should be after it. Right. Do you want to kind of set the scene first with, first of all, I guess just saying what you think of when you in terms of co-managed IT, and when you're saying CoMITs.
Yeah. So, and this is the fun part, is that I've been talking about CoMITs, co-managed IT services, for I think we're right now 2 years, 3 years, whatever, and about half. We're probably closer to 2/3 of MSPs are saying they have a managed service type relationship with an organization that retains their internal IT department. Okay, which is, I would say, is the broadest definition of co-managed IT services. But then you ask them, okay, are you repeating it? Do you have it so that it's something you can go to market with? It's something that you can, because the whole thing about MSPs is we want to repeat, we want to scale, we want profitability, because we're able to do it over and over and over again. And most cases, the conversations that I've had with MSPs, they fell into it. They fell into an opportunity for that relationship. And so it's hard for them to dust that off, say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and then go out to market and do it again. And that's where I think a lot of us are missing the button, quite honestly, including us. It wasn't until about 2 years ago that we said, oh, that's what we've been doing for all these years. And then we came to approach to systematize it. And that's where the whole CoMITs thing came from.
I'm going to pull up a graphic that you're going to recognize. And so I'm going to go to sharing my screen here. And this is something I pulled from one of your books.
What did you do that for?
I want to give people a taste, I want them to see what they can get.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to talk through this? This is the decision tree? Because I think this gets to a point that I think a lot of people probably on the call here have heard of co-managed IT, and maybe some things come to mind. And I hear in conversations the different approaches. Like, okay, you could as the MSP, you could focus in on a single element, a siloed part of it. And this is something that you address kind of in this chart here. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and essentially, so to set the stage for this chart, what we do is we lift up the internal IT folks. We give them access to what we call our stamps, the software, the tools, the methodologies, the portals. We give them access. So they're an extension of our technical department. And then we split the responsibilities. And in some cases, the internal IT, they'll take care of everything, and we're just kind of a reserve. We call that full CoMITs. Another case is where we call desktop CoMITs, where the internal IT, they'll take care of the desktops, they'll take care of the end users, and we'll take care of the servers and infrastructures. And then there's server CoMITs, which is the reverse. But it really comes down to this. So, and this is the sales process. So we come down to the whole, do you have an IT department? And yes or no. And let's see. Boy, my eyes are not like they used to be. So if they have an IT department, if they're a possible client, if they have an IT department, traditionally it's been a do you like them? And if they don't like the IT department, yay, we'll sell MSP. If they do like the MSP, their internal IT department was like, never mind, we'll go away, or we'll try to sell them that siloed. We'll sell you backups, we'll sell you the firewall, we'll sell you antivirus, but that's it, so on and so forth. Now what we're saying is, well, what about a cooperative relationship? What about where we'll actually extend, like I was saying, where we'll basically extend and enhance and really build up and beef up your internal IT department by giving them access to all these tools? Because in a lot of cases, these internal IT departments, they've never had a chance to develop this stuff, whereas you already have.
And so I noticed that one of the things that you talked about in the book, you mentioned with the silo approach, there's actually some risks there of commoditizing yourself, basically, is one of the things you mentioned. Right. Are there any things like that you, when you're thinking about this, is there one of these approaches that you favor more than others?
It's the same approach. It's just a question of how do we compartmentalize it based on the needs. That's the thing. It's the exact same process. It just depends on how we're dividing what the responsibilities are. So if you take a look, the two most common methodologies I think that are used in terms of outside organizations working with internal IT departments, the first one is, like you talked about, the siloed. And siloed, you're a commodity. And because the ease of implementing a siloed solution is also the ease at which you can be replaced. If all you do is you monitor and you manage the firewalls, that's it. And there's very little interaction. There's very little value add in working with the internal IT department. Then they could literally call up Firewalls or Us tomorrow and replace your services with somebody else. And so there's an enticement there of it's easy to get in, but it's easy to get out. And the one thing, that stereotypical question of what keeps you up at night, as an MSP, to me, it's commoditization. If my service is a commodity, I'm in trouble. I'm going to compete on price. Okay, and that's a killer. That's nowhere to go but down. The second, aside from siloed, is what we call the seagull. And the seagull is the organization that comes in out of nowhere, flies around, squawks, makes a lot of noise, drops a lot of and then flies off again. That's often used for organizations where they don't have a particular skill set or they don't have enough bodies to handle something. So they may bring you in to just do this one project and then you go away. And in a lot of cases, there isn't a really strong relationship between the internal IT department and the seagulls because it's not in the budget. They didn't have the budget to do real skills transfer, to really do training, to really whatever. So, at the end of the day, they have to call the seagull back in and pay them additional money to do things. We've seen this a lot, especially in the one-man shops, where, and I'll give manufacturing the props they deserve. Manufacturing, the definition of obsolete in manufacturing is often it doesn't turn on anymore. So they'll be running that 2008 server, 2008. Oh, now they got to go to 2019. And their internal IT department doesn't have a clue what the new stuff does. And at the end of the day, they still don't. So that's whereas the CoMITs is a relationship. And it's the relationship first and foremost. And
I think there's a lot we want to talk about in terms of managing that relationship and how you get off on the right foot. I mean, you've got so much to say about establishing as being helpful versus antagonistic, which I think you have a video on your Facebook group, which is awesome that I saw recently. And for everybody who wants to kind of cheat ahead, you can go to that agenda doc. I'll share the link again. We've got a bunch of links to sources. And that includes that Facebook group I just mentioned, but also links to Bob's site. He's got a site that he just launched, right? Congratulations for that. That has a bunch of free resources as well. So I noticed that we've got some questions, and one very quick question for you. So Christopher, you asked, what does STAMP stand for again? You're talking about the standard operating stuff, right?
Right. So it basically is, because if you can make acronyms, you get to charge more. It's software, tools, methodologies, and portals. All right. Essentially, it's the collection of tools that you as an MSP use, and you configure and you manage, and you then use them and you offer them to your pure MSP clients, not as tools for them to use, but for tools for them to get the value out of. And in the case of CoMITs, you actually extend that offer to the internal IT to, as best as you can, depending upon the tools, for them to actually use it to do their job. So to use an example, Autotask, they'll use Autotask for ticketing. They'll use Datto RMM for doing RMM work, ConnectWise, all those kinds
Ninja RMM, for example.
Ninja RMM, absolutely. Oh, can you help it? All right, yeah,
but yeah, so actually a question about that, because
all the other stuff.
Well, no, absolutely not. But a question. You're very nice for saying so. When it comes to the standardization, because this is what I hear all the time is preached. As an MSP, standardization is that's your religion, right? But when you get into these situations, isn't that like possibly just throwing a big stick of dynamite with your standardization? I mean, you're talking about another IT team that has their own tools, all that stuff.
Well, but that's the thing, is you're not. And this is where you got to be real careful. And part of the book, the MSP Survival Guide, that's written for you guys, MSPs. This is how you get implemented with co-managed IT. And then this book, I Don't Want Your Job, this is actually written for the internal IT person. I spend some time on both of these books talking about what isn't a good opportunity. If you go into an internal IT department and they've already got their stamps and they don't want to switch, we've just lost about half to 2/3 of the value that you bring to the table in what I call a traditional CoMITs relationship. Because either A, you're going to have to learn how their stamps work, or they're going to have to learn how your stamps work. And this is why, in my opinion, when you take a look at the larger the organization, the client organization, the more likely it is they're going to have some of these tools already in place. So this actually oddly works better for the smaller organizations in terms of the size of the IT staff, and especially those who haven't had time. And I was talking to an organization this morning about we're looking at a CoMITs relationship, and they don't have time to do ticketing because they're too busy ticketing. They're too busy working on stuff that should otherwise be ticketing. And I talked to them and I basically said, so how do you deal with management? And their comment was, they don't understand what we do. They don't understand how busy we are and all the stuff we're doing, and we're running around like crazy. And I'm like, well, if we can provide you with these tools and services, you're going to be able to show them, here's the tickets. well, we don't have time to implement this. No, we implement it. We've already configured it. We've done the work. We'll let you do it. And plus, we get to be the consultant who comes in out of nowhere, because we've all had that situation, if you've ever been in internal IT, where you say, the sky is blue, the sky is blue, the sky is blue. And they're like, whatever. And then this consultant comes in out of nowhere and says, did you know the sky is blue? And the manager goes, oh, I didn't realize that, looks at their IT and goes, oh, what is wrong with you people? Why didn't you know that? And we're like, we'll make sure when we come in to say the sky is blue that we say it together. And in those kind of situations, they look at you and there's that, you're really here to help us. You're here to support us, to make us better, which is the crux, the core behind that.
And you're also talking about, it can be a pain enough to deal with a client owner, right? To deal with management. But now you're talking about having a third wheel, or maybe you're being the third wheel. I don't know.
Depends on the situation. It can go both ways. So, but here's the thing. Let's think about it. Two situations, two scenarios. Scenario number one, the manager is, you got to deal with the owner, the manager, CEO, whatever you want to call it. Think of every stereotypical issue that you're going to have with that, and all the issues, you still got those. Okay, those are still there. Now let's make it CoMITs. Two scenarios are going to happen. One, the internal IT person fights you because they don't see you as a friend. They don't see you as an ally, in which case it's worse. It's a third wheel. Now you're fighting for mom's or dad's attention. But what if they're on your side and you're on their side? Now you've got an ally who's inside the building, who's inside the organization, who has some level of knowledge as far as the organization goes that you didn't. You're actually in a better position to talk with management because you're coming at it from a united front. But only if you approach it from that angle.
So Tom, I see we've got you on here, which is great. I'm going to make you the focus for a second. How you doing? Good to have you on. So Tom, great. You're the channel chief advisor here at Ninja, and people who have joined in previous sessions, they know your background. But for those who are new, you want to talk about how, you're an owner, you've dealt with some of this stuff before, and maybe we should back up a little bit and talk about why CoMITs are even appealing to an MSP. What's the big draw to them?
Yeah, well, the big draw for me, and this is what it's the point where I was able to scale my business to the next level and hire a lot more people. First of all, these deals are often for a lot more money than your typical managed service agreement will be. The second part of it that's nice is that you're not doing usually all of it. So you get to kind of be a specialist, whereas usually you're a generalist. And I'm sure Bob could speak to that. And that was very appealing to me because I was able to take certain people that were specialists and put them on site on a regular basis at CoMIT clients. And that allowed me to have them also have their days and their hours maximized, because I would do it as, I'm going to have someone at your location these days of the week for these hours. And so I also had utilization of my technicians go up considerably. But overall, co-managed IT is very interesting to me because you're also dealing with larger entities, and they usually have more layers in place, usually better management, and getting paid I found was a lot easier as well.
So it's kind of interesting. We've got some polls that we launched, and Bob, I think you'll be interested in these too. Just kind of read the room a little bit. And anyone who's on the chat, if you want to go down to those poll questions and have your input too, that'd be awesome. But we're asking people, first of all, who out there is offering co-managed IT services? Right now, we've got about a little over half of you guys are. So Bob, good for you to know. And then do you have standardized co-managed IT services that you're offering? And we've got about 2/3 saying no. So you're offering something. Is it standardized? Not really. Are you actively selling or marketing that offering? We got about 3/4 that are saying no, not actively selling. So I'm kind of curious if everybody, for the people in the chat here, if you want to chime in with a specific scenario here. But it sounds like from that it's kind of falling into what you're talking about, Bob, where this isn't something people are actively going out and seeking. It's something that's just kind of happening.
The client comes to them and says, hey, we got the situation. Can you guys provide a help desk? Can you guys do this for us? So on and so forth. And the challenge with that, and I'm really interested in hearing what other folks say, in spite of the fact that I don't shut up, is that the client gets to drive. Because if you don't have a format and a function and a standard, then they're going to come in and say, here's what we want. And you've got nothing to match it against in terms of how you do things. So you've lost the advantage of already having done it, already having something in place that you can scale and that you can just roll out.
Yeah. Speak to that real quick, Bob. It's interesting because I would say most of my co-managed deals kind of dropped into my lap, generally from another IT provider. Like I had an application development company I worked with, and that's where I got most of them, because he would see some piece of their IT that was missing, and he would then pull me in for that part. And these usually larger clients. But then it gets me thinking, like, what would I do now if I wanted to go after these kind of deals? What would I have salespeople asking? What kind of questions can generate that same effect, but with you asking the questions and also you putting you in the driver's seat of what that looks like?
Yeah, and that's the key. If you're driving that conversation, it's a great analogy. You get to decide where it goes. Whereas otherwise the client does. And this is not a slam against the clients, because they don't know any better. But you could handle their problems. You could handle their issues. You could still provide the service, but under your terms and your conditions. Because they're approaching you going, hey, I got this problem. Maybe you can help, maybe you can't. Can you do this? And it's that, if you take that question, that specific question that's specific to their needs, and you say yay or nay, then you've just created a specialized, nuanced, that's that one opportunity. As opposed to, well, here's our offerings in the co-managed CoMITs. Not only can we do that, we'll also include this, 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 and this. So we can actually handle that. And then you're really doing a yes and. Yes,
so it's almost like you're offering you have a list of services you offer under CoMIT. And then it's kind of like there may be a base level they need to bring you in on. Like they need to bring you on for one, like maybe you're going to handle all the level 3 support. But then you leave them the options of, hey, listen, we can also handle your level 1, and here's what that would look like.
Well, and honestly, at the end of the day, and again, I want to stress, almost every vendor out there right now, MSP vendor, is talking about co-managed IT now, and almost none of them are talking about what they mean. Okay, they're just saying co-managed IT, we support it. I wonder what it is. Okay. And to the best of my knowledge, and I'm gonna beat my own drum for a second, I'm the only one who's actually proposed here's a framework, here's a format. And the award that gets me is I came out with one before anybody else did. That's it. It is not necessarily saying it is the only way, the best way, or whatever. But what I want to do is I want to have one company here to run, Simplex IT. And I want that one company to operate more or less the same regardless of the client. So I don't have to keep track of, oh, these guys are this way, these guys are this way, these guys are this way. So at the end of the day, I take a look, and I get back to the whole stamps thing. The proposal we make is exactly the same in terms of the tools and the methodologies and the framework and all that, regardless of the company and regardless of whether it's CoMITs, pure MSP, full CoMITs, desktop, whatever. It's the exact same thing. You're getting the exact same tools, the exact same products, the exact same everything. It's just a question of who's going to be running them. And in the case of full, they're going to be running them. In the case of desktops, they're running them in terms of the desktops and the end users and the mobile devices. We're running them in terms of servers and infrastructure. And in the case of server, it's the reverse. That way, there's no question. It's a simple question, and it's a simple, easy thing. And then we basically say, for whatever you're covering, internal IT people, if you have any questions whatsoever, need some advice, devil's advocate, want to run something by us, that's included in the price, because the clients hate being nickeled and dimed. So you want to run through any of this sort of stuff? Absolutely. If you want us to do it, and it's in an area that you're responsible for, just take the ticket, escalate it. It's now billable. We'll take care of it. And when you escalate it, tell us if you want to watch. If you want to learn how we did it, and we'll still document it and all that, so that you won't have to ask us to do it again. Okay? That way, it's fairly straightforward from our standpoint in terms of how we address a CoMITs client versus a pure MSP client.
You know, Bob, something's really coming into the, Kelvin's got a great chat we're going through here, and he brought up something, and this is important. You go into a co-managed IT situation, they've got some proprietary app they built in-house. They've got, you know, they built it, they manage it. And I would say that's the point where I want to leave that in their hands. And maybe I just take over maybe the help desk, the desktop support service board, but I let them control those things that are kind of a little out of my wheelhouse or they could get complicated.
Yeah, and think about it. What's the value of boots on the ground? Boots in the ground, that's called a funeral. But boots on the ground, you've essentially got the situation of, number one, you've got a throat to choke. You've got a person who's there, they're doing the work, they understand the end users, they understand whose needs or whatever, and they hopefully understand the organization better than we ever will. So boots on the ground, that's great. The second is absolutely right there. The specialized knowledge, the knowledge that's going to bring, whether it's particular to an application. We've also got where we've had some IT people who are really engineers and could be billing that company could be billing that person out at like $200 an hour, but instead they're trying to reset somebody's password. So if there's some kind of knowledge pool, that them having that knowledge pool is going to be more valuable than trying to transfer it to us. Hey, absolutely fantastic. And think about it from the standpoint of, it doesn't matter if we're gonna take this body and we're gonna try to get this individual to know how this product works, and it costs $10,000 for this person to become knowledgeable. Well, am I going to spend that $10,000? Because if that's the only client that wants me to support it, I'm going to have to charge them for it somehow. Whereas if they have it and they're the only ones, they can invest in that person and get much more value out of it. So it really just comes down to the who wants to take on the responsibility, and where does the cost go and where does the value go?
Bob, also what makes me think about is that I remember we as MSP owners, we all have this thing where we want to please everyone. We want to say, oh, we can take that all on. And I definitely lost some deals where if I had looked at like that one weird app or strange Linux server and said, you know, that's the Achilles heel here. I don't need that pain. If I had said that, there are some deals I would have kept that I lost because I committed to doing things that were outside my wheelhouse.
Yeah, and we'll get back to the whole, what is a bad CoMITs client? And I've said, and I've been saying it more and more these days, is the only thing worse than a good CoMITs opportunity getting away is a bad CoMITs opportunity signing. So we had one right around the beginning of the year where they were specifically looking for co-managed, which was really odd. And they had the infrastructure all set. They wanted somebody to come in and take over the infrastructure, managing and monitoring. And the guy had it running pretty well. Can't argue with it, but boy, was it not best practice. It was not anybody's standard. It was a weird as all get out, but it worked. Now, for us to basically say, we're just going to do CoMITs, we're going to come in and take over, we'd have to learn that, redo that, rebuild that. And he was completely resistant. He just wanted us to learn his way of doing it and do it that way. And he was so friendly. Oh, it won't be a problem. But it was one of those where, from my spidey sense, was tingling the whole time of, I'm going to lose all profitability because we're going to have to learn this special way. And all my techs are going to have to know to go look up the documentation for this special way every time we do anything over there. And he's resistant to change without even hearing what we would want to do. So we looked at it and we basically said, we got to walk away. We can't do that. And we did. And they really wanted us to do it because we were the only of the MSPs were the only ones who even would talk CoMITs and actually had something behind it. But we said, no, this is just, it's not a good fit for us.
Life is short.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Oh, I was going to say, Tom, feel free to jump back in after this, but I just wanted to give everybody a heads up. So I'd like to veer us into talking about again, kind of this managing the relationship and managing the internal IT person. And I want to bring on Ray to talk with that too, because Ray's got some great experience in this regard. But before we do that, got some good questions that have come in, and they're more around the immediate like sales side, right? I mean, this, when we talked about and positioned this webinar, we're kind of like, everyone's saying this is a immediate opportunity now, right? So Bob, here's a couple of the questions. One is, we've got one from Jonathan. He says, I cold call from my company, suggestions about breaking the ice with these guys, the internal IT guys specifically. And so backing away from that, I'm just kind of like, with the customers that you're getting, are you getting inbounds because you've done a great job? You've written these books, you've got your site, and like you show up and your name has just gotten out there? Or are you actively hunting these opportunities?
Yes, to both.
Okay.
So the first of all is you have to consider talking, you're talking to two different parties. You're talking to the CEO and you're talking to the internal IT person. And sometimes it's not your choice. But the thing is that if you start talking to an internal IT person, and this is just my feeling, if you start talking to an internal IT person about a co-managed relationship, and then it turns out that they want to talk about a pure MSP instead, meaning they want to get rid of the guy, walk away. Walk away. And the reason being is because if you ever because internal IT people don't trust MSPs already, because historically we're trying to get your job. And there is absolutely, out of the gate, there is an assumption that that's why you're out there. And anything you do to reinforce that belief or that assumption is going to hurt you in the long run. Now, I err on the side of caution on this, but absolutely, I'm a believer in that. And if you're talking to the internal IT person, the first thing you got to do is build trust. You got to build the fact. You got to convince them somehow. And once you've got a few MS or a few CoMITs under your belt, you do. Here's the testimonials. Go call these guys. I'm not taking their jobs. But you also then, how can I help? What do you need in terms of help that I can do to make your lives easier? So again, this morning, I spent about an hour with the 3 IT people, and I didn't talk about CoMITs. There's like 5 minutes left. We only had a half-hour schedule. We spent about an hour. I was talking about all the nuances of Office 365. I was telling about all the nuances as far as some of the monitoring goes and some of the things that they can do and ways to deal with management and ways to deal as far as communication goes. And I was challenging them on some of the stuff that they did, but I was basically, I understand why you're thinking that, but let's think about it from this perspective. So every word I said was truly to help them, to give them some guidance. And I think that's absolutely critical. I used to be CIO of a sunroom manufacturing company. We had about 4 locations nationwide. And there was this one guy who was the laziest salesman I ever knew in my life. He was also one of the most successful. And this would have been back in the late 90s, back, before some of you were born. And I asked this guy, I said, how do you do this? How are you so successful? And you don't barely work. And what he would do is every springtime, he would go to every continuing adult education center and he would put on a one night show, how to build and install your own sunroom. And he said he worked his butt off. He would show how to deal with foundations, how to deal with the cities as far as zoning, all that kind of stuff, how to do with it, this, that, the other. And he held nothing back. He did everything he could to communicate and to educate his potential clients. And he said, by the end of that evening, nobody in their right mind would want to install their own sunroom. So who would they talk to? They talked to him.
Yep.
Because he didn't try to sell them. He tried to help them. He tried to do everything he could to share the knowledge, to make their lives easier, to make their lives better, and didn't think in terms of selling them. That's the one word of advice, that's one word. That's the one thing I would very, very, very strongly recommend when it comes to marketing and talking with the internal IT. Don't even talk about CoMITs until you've got that trust established.
Well, I mean, yeah, you have a video that you posted on Facebook, I think this last week, where you're mentioning just it requires the shift, right? Like you're used to conducting an assessment and doing it from an antagonistic perspective. Like, here's what sucks about everything. And then that's not exactly the approach you want to take with in these situations.
Right.
Yeah. So Ray, thanks for coming on, sir. Everybody, this is Ray Orsini from OIT, and Ray, look at this. We're such a big happy family here. So Ray, you were on our last chat, and we got into this a little bit. You were talking about some of your co-managed IT experience. Sounds like you're aligned a lot with Bob and the approach here, the importance of getting that partnership. But anything you want to add to that in terms of just your own experience and some of the situations you found yourself in?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reiterate because, Bob said it and it sounds like something that's a little bit scary for an MSP to hear, but I agree with him 1,000%, whether or not that's mathematically possible, that if they start talking about replacing their IT, run. Remember, whether they're having a bad day with that with their internal IT, or whether they're, it's an ongoing thing, it doesn't matter, because when you leave, that IT person is there, and I guarantee you they have other people that are their champions. You're not, it's like talking to your brother or sister about their significant other. Never badmouth them, because you're not going to win that argument. Be okay with walking away. You know what I mean? You don't want to walk into a crumbling house or a house on fire because you're going to catch fire yourself. My experience with the MSPs or with the co-managed, we're usually filling one of two roles. Either they are completely inundated with the tier 1 stuff, the help desk, the whatever is going on, the password resets, the printer jams, and they want to get out of it because they got hired to do the bigger stuff. They got hired to do, bring in that new LOB app. They got hired to bring in, who's this, design this new website, or whatever their subject matter expertise is. And you're coming in to lessen their burden for them. Or the exact opposite. They brought in a junior to take over IT for a large company. They have no idea what they're doing. And they need somebody with resources. They need somebody with platform, with infrastructure, right? If you're leveraging Ninja RMM or your whatever platform you have, so you can leverage those resources on their behalf. Remember, internal IT, every MSP knows this. Internal IT is really great at one set of tools. So if it ever comes to the matter that their tool can't address something, or they're lacking education on the newest iteration of those tools or other opportunities or options, they don't know them. So they use you to bring it in. Whatever the scenario is, either of those two, be the champion on behalf of the internal IT. Make them your friend. Make yourself their best friend. So you're supporting each other. So when you go up to the CTO, you go up to the CFO, or whoever you're speaking with, make it so that you're supporting each other as a united front when you're talking to them. It's going to make that relationship that much better. I've talked before about making champions in a company for you, on your behalf. I love gatekeepers, making them the champions because they have the ear of the executives most times. Make them the ones that are saying, oh, this company is great. They're doing awesome. We really need to do more with them because they're making our lives better. So they're there when you're not doing it.
Yeah, those are great points. And I'm seeing here in the comments here, it's funny, like a lot of people are being like, oh, yeah, we do have this kind of client. We just didn't have a name for this. Yeah. Which is really interesting, right? And I think part of the beauty about your approach here, Bob, and some of the things that you're stressing here is by giving it a name and then standardizing things, then you're able to take this on. It's not just like the weird one-offs that aren't going to be profitable for you. You're starting to fine-tune things and make it so it can be more profitable. So I guess going back to this idea that, everyone has this general sense that we're in weird times, budgets are being cut at companies. Maybe there's more management teams out there who are like, can we cut down on our internal IT? Can we do something else, find another situation? It does seem like everyone kind of agrees there's opportunity out there. But in terms of actually taking advantage of it, what are some of the things that you suggest in terms of fine-tuning or getting it to where you can actually start either hunting or making this more than just the one-off deals?
So the first thing is you have to define what your CoMITs is. Okay, because we talk about different versions, different strategies, all of that kind of fun stuff, and do not base it on your existing clients, because your existing clients were circumstance. And it's kind of like the break fix, the transition of break fix over to managed service. Don't base your managed service practice on your break fix clients. Figure out what you want to do, and whatever your value is, what's the value of your MSP? If you put you and 3 other MSPs in a room together, how are you going to differentiate yourself? You should use that differentiation to define your CoMITs, because it's going to make it that much easier to have the discussion with potential clients, whether they be internal IT or CEO. And everything you do that's different between your pure MSP and your CoMITs makes it that much harder and more complicated to do marketing, sales, or servicing for both simultaneously within your organization. So that's above all, that's the first thing, is to standardize that, because otherwise, what are you talking about? Okay.
Yeah.
And as far as the strategy for marketing and all, if you go to my site, comitsformsps.com, there's some examples there. But the bottom line is, how can you help? How can you give out some advice that's going to help? And are you aiming for the smaller 1, 2, 3 person shop? Or are you aiming for someone who has a CIO who's looking more to fill in some gaps? However you want to do it. So we do, and if you talk about our values, or Simplex IT goes and all, we're the term we use a lot is we're the cool guys. We're there to help. We're there to communicate. We're there to share. We do a ton of educational events. We do a ton of webinars. We do a newsletter to about 4,000 people that's got advice and all of that kind of fun stuff. So that's what we lead with for the CoMITs. We want to help the internal IT person. And we've created webinar. So we've got this one, and we were doing it as an in-person event, but it was called 3 Ways to Improve Your IT Without Consultants. And it specifically talked to internal IT people. And we talked about, you need to improve your documentation. And here's some tips. Here's some ways to do that. You need to identify single points of failure. Here's some tools. Here's some tips to do that. And you need to improve your relationship between yourself and management. Here's some tools. Here's some tips to do that. We never talked about co-manage. We never talked about MSP. We never talked about any. Our call to action was, hey, you want to set up a time, half hour, an hour, where we'll talk about your specific needs and what you're doing. That's great, free. And I said, we're not going to try to sell you anything. I said, just give me 5 minutes at the end of it to talk about our co-managed IT service. And we did that as a breakfast event twice over a span. We came out with it in November and did it again in February. And we got about 15 people at each one of them, and we signed up 1 or 2 people at each one of them. We're actually switching it over to do the virtual version, I think, in September. Another thing that we're doing now is we have, and this one goes to the CEO. So we're sending a copy of my first book, which was a CEO survival guide, along with a letter basically saying, hey, how can we help? We want to help you support your IT needs, all that kind of fun stuff. If you have an internal IT person and would like to, I'm also including this book to the CEO, along with a separate letter in an unsealed envelope to the internal IT person, with the idea of, hey, if you want to replace your IT person, because it still happens, no problem, call me, because you got this book. If you'd rather, you like your internal IT person, but you know they need help, give them this book, and one of you call us. So it's actually our first effort, our first foray into what we're calling hybrid marketing. But we're letting the CEO make that decision. And I'm okay with talking about either one to the CEO immediately, because sometimes they want to outsource their IT. But if we go to the internal IT person, then we lead with this, and we say, and if you'd like to, give this book to your CEO. But we're only talking about CoMITs in that angle.
Right. It's interesting because, I mean, there's obviously a different messaging there. And when you're messaging to the CEO, I've noticed some things. Like I went looking out there, like who's an MSP, who has dedicated like co-managed IT landing pages, and what's some of the messaging they're using. Do you mind if I pull yours up for a second? Is that okay?
You can, but it's going to be horrible because we really don't do a lot. We don't really, no, go ahead. I don't care. Okay. We do a lot of SEO based anything. We're not really. If you looked at our LinkedIn, we're doing a ton of stuff on LinkedIn.
Fair point.
We're actually posting a video every day.
I mean, I have noticed that you're super active there and in Facebook too, but I just thought this was kind of interesting. And I'll tell you, Bob, I've seen some other sites now looking at this that we can follow up afterwards that are following your blueprint here very, very closely. Very closely.
We steal our stuff. I mean, it's one of those where the CoMITs for MSPs, there's some free stuff there. I also have what we call the starter kit, which includes, there's actually 2 versions of the I Don't Want Your Job. This one actually doesn't include any mention of Simplex IT. It's generic. We include copies of this for the MSPs, and we include all of the material for the campaigns that we were talking about. And we're asking $1,000 for it. And if you use early bird discount, you get $200 off, something along those lines.
And we'll definitely
cheaper than any consulting time at all you'll ever book with any business coach, period. Right? I mean, come on, $800, $1,000 to get started in a brand new business revenue generating opportunity. That's ridiculous.
Yeah,
we'll have links to all that stuff for sure. A couple of things I just wanted to call out. You've listed out some of the specific things you're covering, which seems standard. But I love that they're listing out the some of these certain scenarios. And so you're just making it more kind of clear. And I'm assuming here you're kind of talking to a management in this situation, although maybe it's talking to, in some cases, to IT leadership. But I just thought, like, as people on this session here are thinking about, we actually, now that we think about it, we do have some of these clients, and maybe we could start seeking this out more. Maybe we could start defining this a little bit more. I always think it's good to show examples. So thanks for letting me show that. I just wanted to bring this up.
Guys, if I could jump in for a minute, I wanted to talk to you about some of my failures in this area.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
I mean, so I took on a number of these things early on thinking, oh, wow, this is great. And I would pretty much do anything for any amount of money to have a chance at a bigger companies than I usually had as IT. And I ended up in situations where I was doing a portion of the level 1, level 2, but so were they. And then they had their own ticketing system and mine. And these were disasters, and ultimately ended up where there was a lot of room to point fingers, and It was adversarial. And then I finally landed a client where I did things very differently. And they had an employee who was a pretty good overall tech, like, very high level tech, but was doing the desktop, but wasn't really getting it done because he wasn't good at scheduling. And they wanted to keep him on. And I talked to the guy, and I came back to them and I said, listen, I can do this for you, but in order for me to take on your IT, level 1 through level 3 support, and then you're going to have a CTO and a separate web person and separate C pieces, I'm going to have to evaluate and either hire your IT guy or not. But I need you to sign the deal with me regardless. And then, so I got him to sign the contract, and then I evaluated their IT person, and I basically hired him on a trial basis to see if he could fit in. And it worked. And interestingly enough, the MSP I owned, he still works for that MSP, like 10 years later. So it worked, but I laid down the law in terms of I'm not going to take a piece of a level or leave someone else there. I've either got to have set levels I handle or not at all, and my ticketing system. And I would say that's an option too that worked really well. If you see that they have internal IT people that might fit well into your team, it might give you a big advantage. It did for me because I broke that learning curve. And rather than give up a lot of hours in the front, I already had someone on my team then who could handle a lot of their IT needs, but really needed the structure that my MSP supported.
Yeah. My biggest failure was we brought on somebody who talked wonderfully. And this was early on. And this was a server CoMITs. So he was going to take responsibility for the servers and the infrastructure. We were going to take the desktops and the end users. He would never let us.
Oh,
he made it so that all of the tickets, all of the stuff had to go through him. And then he would go ahead and take care of the stuff and then complain that we weren't doing anything.
Oh.
And we were like, well, yeah, because you're taking care of it and not letting us know about it or whatever. And it was one of those where the guy, he's a good guy, and he's still kind of a client of ours. But we went through it, and it just became more and more obvious. And he was the reason why we walked away from the other one. You know, if you fail and you don't learn, that is the saddest thing on the planet. But if you fail, you have that failure, and it's like, okay, we're not going to do that again. And that was the situation we ran into with that next potential client who wanted everything his way.
Yeah,
well, I think that's
really
kind
define
of the
those
point, right? Like John Steves mentions in the chat here, he asked like if anybody has suggestions for a template for co-managed IT service contract. And I know Tom shared a contract before on one of our previous sessions. But I think with co-manage, commits, it's more about defining the edges, right? We've heard others talk about this, defining the edges, defining the offering. I feel that's even more crucial with commits because you have so many chefs in the kitchen. So there needs to be a clear understanding, right? Like who's responsible.
Yep. And I would say there's two areas where commits is right now lacking. And they are legal and security. All right. And I say this because we have no idea what you currently have. So you need to take a look, and this gets back to you need to figure out what your commits is, and how your commits works with your current pure MSP value, and then adjust accordingly. Because if somebody from the outside just comes in and says, "Here's your commits agreement," how does it match? And if it's significantly, it's a complete rework or rewrite from what you are currently using, it's going to be rough. So figure out what your commits is, figure out how it differs, talk to the resources you use to create your current agreement on the pure MSP, and then figure out using that resource what needs to change. On the security side, the security tools are all over the place as far as how many of them actually allow you to have to be able to delegate access.
Right. I think Ray had a really good point here about the boundaries, I would call them. And I would say the agreement that we put out there probably doesn't cover this fully. I would probably, I don't know, we can talk about that. Probably have to have an alternate agreement that very clearly specified who handled what levels, who handled what hardware, what levels of support, what's not, and really set those boundaries and expectations for both parties. Because that is, if you don't do that, then the internal people that are left in IT, as Bob already pointed out, they will find some way often to press on you because they feel like you stepped on their turf. That turf has to be totally defined before you start work.
Yeah, I mean, guys, there's, in addition to having, Bob used the phrase one throat to choke, I think, what about liability and everything with that? I mean, is this, I guess this goes back into working with your agreement, but I mean, the more and more I hear about this, I'm thinking, okay, this is obviously an opportunity for some, and if you can figure it out, it can be a very lucrative opportunity. But it sounds like there's a lot of complications get brought into it. But yeah, any thoughts specifically around that, around like liability and if you're sharing management on things?
Well, I think it's back to the edges, right? It's saying, if it's in relation to this specific thing, this LOB software, this first tier support, our SLAs and our, what hours we provide, I think it's all about defining those edges. The edges are going to restrict or expand the liability you take on. My 2 cents. I'm sure Bob is going to be more eloquent on the subject because you may have written a book or two on this. I think I've heard.
Yeah, but have you read them?
That's
what I thought. So, I haven't either. No, but it's one of those where I'm going to reiterate. So I don't have a great answer for that because it depends. And it depends on the relation. And again, I get back to that whole, you've got to figure out what your commits is, how it relates to your current pure MSP. And you need to take that agreement that you currently use for your pure MSP, and you need to extend that on some level to include the commits. And if your commits is so wildly different that you have to completely redo your agreement, I'm not 100% sure I'd be comfortable with that situation. And it could be politically avoiding the answer. Absolutely. But it's one of those where your current pure MSP agreement may not be in depth enough for your situation. So I'm not answering it, but I'm warning.
Yeah, you're right. And we do have this managed service agreement that I put together with Ninja, and I would say if someone out there has questions about how to use that, I would tell you, first of all, you're probably going to have to pull out a lot of sections and redo it, or have an entire area that's defining the boundaries and who's responsible for what, that you punch into it in order to do it. And if someone wants to know about doing that, you can reach out to me and we could talk about it.
Cool.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out here to Here's your handle. It's RatDad 2022. You've been answering questions here in the Q&A, and I think you've been giving some really good advice. Thank you for participating and being proactive like that. Really appreciate it. But one of the questions that he answered was, what are the top 3 kind of CoMIT services you're finding people looking for right now? And I'm sure this is going to go back into like, well, it depends. But Bob, with you seeing this more and more, and this being kind of a big chunk of your life, are there some things that are kind of rising to the top?
I hate to say it, but the whole concept. So if you get into the small pieces or anything, you're starting to get into the whole silo relationship. So if we're basically saying, so it's helping the current IT people. That's really the biggest thing we bring to the table for this. Is we try to make them more productive and have better lives and be actually seen better within the organization with a better relationship with management.
And we're right at 2 here. We did start a little bit late, so I want to give everyone a chance to ask any other final questions you have. But Bob, I mean, any parting thoughts in terms of setting that tone from the get-go with an internal IT person? I mean, you mentioned your calls now, I mean, where you're really spending a ton of time just trying to kind of like drop some knowledge, show that you're here to help. But any other advice that you have?
Yeah. So the thing is first of all, again, I get back to the whole define your CoMITs, define your CoMITs. And then you can do a couple of things. You can either cast the wide net, in which case that would be start sharing some resources. Again, connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll see some of the stuff that we're posting. We're posting a video every day. It's not all, it isn't even remotely all IT, but we're trying to create that familiar, you can ask us anything, so on and so forth. So you can either cast a wide net by just putting out stuff that this is helpful, we're here to help, and alternate between stuff that would be helpful to an internal IT person and stuff that would be helpful to an organizational management. Because whether it's pure MSP, or excuse me, CoMITs, or it's pure MSP, you're looking to talk with both. And then find opportunities. When you start talking with people, talk with them, about what they need and how they're doing. And we're actually, one of the things we're going to be adding, we're about halfway through with an assessment tool. And the assessment tool, in my opinion, an IT assessment for a CoMITs client is exactly the same as a pure MSP. You do the exact same process. However, you also assess their situation. But whereas all of the other aspects, when you look at server, when you look at security, backups, infrastructure, all that, it is a question of, is it healthy? And if not, what needs to be done? When you look at their internal IT in a pure MSP, is it healthy? What needs to be done? But if it's a CoMITs relationship, you look at it more of a, how can we help? What can we bring that's going to make them more productive, happier, all of that kind of fun stuff? And we're finding that there are twists. And we've come up with about 15 categories so far, 15 items in the internal IT audit, where we talk about, how are they as far as training goes for themselves? How are they as far as management relationships? How are they in terms of documentation? How are they in all those? Now, in every one of those cases, we're not going to say they suck. We're going to say they need help to do this. And then in the proposal, we're going to include the resources in order to make that happen. But notice the change in terms of what is our goal and what are we trying to do. So we'll use a network detective tool as an example, and we'll make that available to them. And we'll also, by the way, we'll go over assessments and we'll go over proposals with the internal IT people before we go over with management. Not necessarily the money, but what we're proposing to do, because we want them on board.
I know we're running close here, but I had this thought in my mind for people either in terms of a sales perspective. If you're an MSP owner or you're a salesperson, or you can tell the salesperson this, generally as an MSP, when we're talking to people in a networking type situation, we'll say, how does your IT handled? And then when someone says we have our own IT company in there, I would say just insert a couple of questions there, but like, can you tell me a little more about that? Do you maybe have some pieces of that you call contractors for, or other services? Get a feel for if they're used to outsourcing even a portion, even if they call someone for like their router support or security. Because if you can get them to say yes to one of those questions, you might uncover the possibility they might have a need for a co-manager to be open to it. As soon as you can establish that they're willing to go outside of in-house for anything. So I would say just insert a couple questions in there and you'll be surprised what you find.
Yeah, I mean, one question I see people asking, I mean, again, my little landing page detective work, but what happens when that person gets sick? You know, what happens when a person wants to take a vacation?
So that's a discussion that's actually, I started on Facebook earlier. We had a company that talked to us about CoMITs, single person IT shop. And they talked to us about CoMITs back in December, and they weren't interested in it because they had the IT guy and all that. But we spent about 2 hours with them going over their hardware situation, giving them some advice in terms of how they could upgrade, all of that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. And it turned out, we just got a call from them about a week ago. The guy became really ill, not COVID, but he can't get into the office now. He can barely walk around. And it's becoming very, very, a very critical issue. So we've been asked, now we're coming in and we're talking about COVID or CoMITs, and we're talking about bringing it in and creating that partnership. And it's one of those where I'm actually having a bit of a tough time. And you can, again, if you join the CoMITs group, you can see the dialogue because I'm sharing this with the group. Because I don't want to seem like we're taking advantage of the situation, because the guy is miserable, and I'm familiar with some of the stuff that's happening to him. It is not fun. So I don't want to basically make it sound like we're just coming in to take his job. We're coming in to take over. We're coming in to do whatever. But by the same token, I also don't want to do stuff for free and not get paid for it. So we're walking that fine line, that fine dance. And the neat thing is if we're able to get this guy in on a CoMITs agreement, and help him, and man, what a case study is he going to be for that exact situation, to basically say, yeah, he did get sick and we were able to take care of it. But think about how they could have avoided that if we would have gone with that in the first place.
Yeah. And you know what? Offering to help out a company when people are out and with no long-term expectations, maybe just a couple week engagement, that will leave you in a very good light with them. And then when they need to replace that person or expand, they're probably going to call you. It puts you in front of them.
Well, they've already told me that their plan is, if this guy can't come back, they're going to outsource.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, Bob, I think it's great that you're sharing that. I mean, I jumped on that thread too in the Facebook group. And so for everybody who's interested, this link is in that agenda doc that I shared. I'm going to drop that here too. This is a private group, very exclusive. Although you let me in, so. And this is cool. Like, I just think it's a cool thing that you're doing, that you're actually talking about live opportunities that you have. It makes it all more real. And again, like giving people actual examples of how this is working, I think it's huge. And yeah, just to wrap up, I guess I'm going to scroll through the questions one more time. But Bob, anything else you want to talk about? I mean, we've got the links to the new site. We're going to follow up with an email that we can include some more information on. But anything else you wanted to mention that we didn't touch on?
No, I think this is great conversations. You guys, I think you guys get it. This is what we call a blue ocean right now. There are very, very, very few MSPs who are actively going out to build this business. And I think there are three opportunities right now for MSPs in this situation. One is, I think there's a lot of MSPs who are totally doing everything on price. They're going to be in trouble. They're not going to be able to survive this situation. They're not going to be able to adapt. They're not going to be able to adjust. So the clients or the potential clients who said no because you were too expensive within the last year or so, check in on them. That's number one. Number two, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said that the day of companies completely outsourcing, switching from internal to MSP, the day of that being a common happening, I think we're over, because everybody moved. I don't think that's true anymore. I think there are a lot of organizations that are open to outsourcing, and this is replacing their internal IT. I think more companies are open to outsourcing right now than were at the beginning of the year. And some for choice, some not for choice, but I think that's there. And then the third one is CoMITs. I think there's a lot of organizations who are overwhelmed because of all of the nuances and all of the stuff that's happening right now, whether they be they're underpowered in terms of bodies, they're underpowered in terms of security or skill sets. I think there's opportunities there. I think those are three very large opportunities. And we've started marketing. We did not market for about 2 months, 3 months at all. We just did webinars, we did stuff. We started marketing again about 3 or 4 weeks ago. We're generating leads. We are generating leads about at the same rate we were in the beginning of the year. The business and the work is out there.
Well, great note to end on, Bob. And thank you so much for taking the time. I want to thank Ray too, Ray Orsini for coming on again. He had to jump, so Ray, you'll see this in the recording, but thanks a lot. I always appreciate you being here. Everybody in the chat, Kelvin and everyone who's been kind of a repeat offender here, thank you so much for doing it. And Tom, thanks for jumping on too. So before we head off, Tom, the next live chat that we're doing, it's going to be in a couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
You are going to be sharing something that a tool that you had, right? When you were using when you were an MSP.
Yeah, guys, this is going to be my favorite thing to talk about. I have a cost calculator, very simple, built in Excel, that I use to figure out what to charge managed service clients on a contract basis, even calculates out profitability and what to pay salespeople. And I also use this tool to go back with existing contracts and make sure they're becoming more profitable, because I have a theory in managed services that as managed service agreements age and you're with a client longer, those engagements should become more profitable with time. And so we're going to, in the next session in 2 weeks, I'm going to take everyone through this spreadsheet, show you how I fill it in, how I use it in both ways, and how you can use it to make sure you're getting paid the right amount from your clients.
All right. Thanks again. That definitely we'll be sending out email invites to everybody, of course, for that. It's going to be in a couple of weeks. And Bob, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing the next event you do, more chats in the Facebook group. I look forward to continue to watch your hair develop.
Thanks. We'll see what my wife wins.
But yeah, thanks everybody. This has been great. We'll see you for the next one. Take care.
Very easy.